So what happens is most people get a little bit more money, and the second they get more money, they elevate their lifestyle. The shoes that I wear, the cars that I drive, the houses that I have, still to this day, I don't show any of those things. People may see them if they see me, but I do not flash that because to me, that's not real wealth. Real wealth is when you're able to control your time. When you're able to choose that you want to come to this event to pour into people, that it doesn't matter what happens on the other side of it. The only way you're ever going to get ahead is to just earn as much as you can, but spend the least that you can. Downgrade your lifestyle so that you can increase your investing. That's when your money will make more money and that you won't always have to trade time for it.
It sounds like that's true of your personal economy and your business.
100%. They're interlinked. And that's why, unfortunately, the number one failure in businesses is money.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, welcome to Inside the Process backstage at Playbook 2024. We're super stoked to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So tell everybody a little bit about you and your business.
So my business now, I have a CRM company, Profit Now, that we help business owners figure out their sales process and take in all their customers and their leads and things like that. But I'm also an author. I have a big podcast. So a lot of different verticals. Now, built 2 companies, exited 2 companies, and now I do this.
I love it. And you actually started your first business at 19. Is that right?
Yeah.
With no college degree, no family wealth, just you and a dream, which I admire so much.
Thank you.
Because I have very similar upbringing of like, being a teenager, you're kind of on your own. You got to figure it out. I moved out when I was 16. And for me, it was always mindset. And I feel like that's a lot of what your strengths are, is just having an incredible mindset of perseverance and resilience and all of those good things. What do you feel like was the mindset that allowed you to see a vision so young and bring it to life?
So I always call it mental toughness, right? Like, I think that mindset almost has a little bit of a bad connotation lately because it sounds a little fluffy. Right? Yeah. But if you have mental toughness, it's like you have the ability to direct your thoughts and know that those thoughts become behaviors, those behaviors become actions, those actions become habits. So we have to be really careful with what we think. And so for me in the beginning, it was honestly just about desperation. Like, I was poor. My dad was a mechanic. I grew up in a trailer. My mom cleaned houses. And it was like, I got to figure this out. If I'm not going to go to college, I got to take on more debt to go to college. And if I'm going to get out in 1999, it would have been a $38,000 degree for a job. I'm like, I don't know if that math makes sense there to go and take on $85,000 in debt to get a $38,000 a year job. So I started the business, and I grew up in my dad's garage from the time I was 5 till I was 16, just learning entrepreneurship. And so I think one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs realize is that every entrepreneur that started something, they all have a story that almost destroyed them. And yet they still had the courage and the fortitude and the resilience to keep going. And so I think to get into business, you need courage. You need a dream that gets you up. You need a drive. You need a why that is like, no more, I'm going to do this, or yes, I'm going to be the first in my family. And that's what it's going to take you to get started. But then what it takes you to keep going is a whole other set of skills that you need to develop. And I think that's what's important, is you need the courage to start, but you need the fortitude to continue. And you need to care more about your dreams and your goals and your vision than the opinions of other people. And if you do that one thing, you can accomplish anything in your life.
Have you always felt that fire, that drive and inspiration over the years? Or have you always had that mental toughness? Or is it something that's maybe changed as you've gotten older?
I would say it's a little different. So yes, I've always had it because I'm always able to look back at what I overcame. You know, I talked about this on stage. I said, anybody that's in here right now thinking, I don't know if I can do this next thing, you know, obviously I built 2 companies, sold 2 companies, invested in a ton of real estate in my life. But now I'm going to write a book, right? There's this thing that happens in the back of your mind because you don't have a representation of this thing before and you don't have experience in it, that you don't have confidence in it. And then people try to call that imposter syndrome, which I think is a little bit of a cop-out. All it is fear. And if you just think about all the other things that you overcame, everything else that you went through 6 months, 6 years, 16 years ago, and you're like, if you could figure that out, you could figure this out too. Right. It minimizes the mountain in front of you. And it just reminds you that it doesn't matter that this mountain is new. You've climbed other mountains. So take the confidence in that and deploy it into this new thing. That's what's going to get you to accomplish this next level in life.
Yeah. Everyone's an imposter until they're a master, right?
Exactly. And until you have the confidence in like your own acumen and what you've developed, you have to lean on other people's. Like that's what I did. At 19, everybody walked in and was like, oh, hi, where's the owner? And I'm like, oh, it's me, right out. I barely just got to vote. I can't order a drink legally, but they somehow allow me to like put people on payroll in this country. Like think of that.
Yeah.
And so it was just an interesting thing that when you want something, when you have a vision so big that you can convince other people of it, anything is possible. And I think that's the belief that people need in the beginning, but it's the courage to keep going to keep them to continue.
I love that. And you mentioned mentorship. And I always say at that age, mentorship, like finding a mentor changed my whole life. Like I accredit a lot of what I've accomplished and just, even being from what I was as a kid to this now to mentorship.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your mentors have really changed your life?
Well, in the beginning, like late 90s, we didn't really have that. Like that wasn't at least in my world, that wasn't a thing, right? We didn't have masterminds and business groups or anything like that. It was books. So I was just naive enough to listen to people that I never met. I would buy a book. Yeah. I had Tony Robbins cassette tapes when I was 15. I had Rich Dad, Poor Dad and The Magic of Thinking Big. And what was the other book I really loved? Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I was just reading those books because I didn't know any different. And then in business, when I had a problem, I would just go to Barnes & Noble and buy another book and read the book and apply the book. Good to Great and all of these other books that's what I learned from. So those were my first mentors. And I always like to share that because nowadays, for some reason, people think they need a mentor or an expert or an opinion. But really often we know what to do. We just haven't got quiet enough and still enough to ask ourselves the right questions. And we allow our intellect to override that instinct. And in my life, anytime I do that, it's been painful. So first it was books. And then from there, when I got to a certain level, there was a group back then when you were doing over 2 million in revenue that you could join. And those were kind of my first women mentors, if you will. And they were more peers. It was women that I could sit around the table with that also had big dreams and big visions and wanted to do big things in their life and that were like me. That was super weird because prior to that, I was kind of in my own little island. And that, I believe, was really what took me to the next level because I could lean on their experiences. We only learn one of two ways, from mentors or from mistakes. But those mentors could be on a podcast. It could be on an event. It could be people that you've never even met and you just read their book. It's just important to apply the information because an idea will never change your life. It's how you implement and execute the idea. That's what will.
I'm so glad you preach that because I say that all the time. People read all these books, listen to all these podcasts, and I'll ask the question, like, what have you implemented lately from? And you can tell by the pause that they haven't really stopped to think about what have I tried to implement. They're just always this knowledge sponge. And I'm like, unless you put it into practice, right, you're not really learning anything.
Right. You have to shift at some point from being a consumer to a creator. In the business world, that's what I say. In the investing world, at some point, you have to decide to not be a consumer and be an investor, right? Instead of consuming the bag, go buy the stock of the company that makes the bag, right? That's how you start to build wealth. So at some point, you have to make that shift. And I think what happens is people don't do it. They go to the event, they don't implement anything. That's why today I said, what's one thing? Just one thing that you're going to do, because most people don't even do that. And then how do you do that one thing in 24 hours? And then if your back was up against the wall and you had to solve the biggest challenge in your business, what would you do if you had to do it in 90 days? Don't give yourself a year. Like, what if you had to do it in 90 days and start to condense time so that you can achieve more in the same amount of time than you ever thought possible?
And now here you are writing a book. So it's like full circle here.
Yeah.
Tell us the title of your book.
So this latest book is The 9% Edge, Life-Changing Secrets to, well, what even is it? Life-Changing Secrets to create more revenue for your business and more freedom for yourself.
I just wrote
the inside. They wrote the subtitle. But it's really about 91% of all businesses fail in their first 10 years. Why? Like these are not just businesses, in my opinion. Like this is a family. This is a dream. These are people who, kids, they probably depend on that business. And 91% of them are all failing in their first 10 years. That they leverage their money and their time to build. And so I was like, how do we get to the bottom of what makes the 9% succeed? Like, how was I so fortunate? What did I pay attention to? And what do all these other businesses pay attention to? Because even if you build it right, less than 15% of all businesses are acquired. And if you're a female founder, like I was, less than 5% of all of female founder businesses are ever acquired. So when I learned that at a really young age, most people would go, oh yeah, well, 95% of those businesses are never acquired. And instead I said, what about the 5%? What did they do? And it was the same thing when I was 15 years old, being from teenage parents. My mom had me when she was 16. I learned a stat that being in poverty, being sexually abused as a child, having teenage parents, that I was an 87% chance to be a statistic, to be a teenage parent, to also have that child enter into an abusive relationship or family. And I remember hearing that at 15 and I thought, what about the 13%? And so that same belief that I had when I was 15, I carried into the business world. And it's really interesting that all of those percentages have just been proof numbers around my life and why I wrote this book, because instead of looking at, yes, there are so many people that can fail, if we just look at the right things, what did these people do that succeed? And they really pay attention to their numbers, they pay attention to their revenue, they understand profit, and they operate from facts as opposed to feelings, because our feelings will often lie. Facts typically don't, unless you have a corrupt controller. But for the most part, they're true.
Yeah.
So we always talk about that in the book, and really how you can create more freedom. Because most people get into business to create freedom, but they actually create a job for themselves. And I saw that today with all the nods and the heads and the hands that went up. Most people end up stuck in a job, and that's not why they started the business to begin with.
So for listeners who feel like they don't have the resources, the connections, or the background to build wealth, what's an action that they can take today? Maybe it's that moment of, intentionality where you say, do this one thing today, and then just keep taking steps forward every day after that.
Well, the very first thing is, if you feel that, you have a limiting belief. Because if you're focusing on your lack of resources, you will never get to anywhere that you want to go. Being resourceful with what you do have. Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, you name every person that's out there. Damon John, myself.
I was going to say, yeah, gotta name
exactly,
yourself.
Right? Like, we've all been extremely resourceful. I had a 6-week run rate on an SBA loan. I had 7 employees. 45 days I was going to run out of money. That's not resources. That was being resourceful with what I had and making sure to show up every day for those people. Mm-hmm. So first, if that's your belief, understand that there are people more successful than you that have gotten there with less, first and foremost. And once you realize that, and you are able to walk away from that belief that's holding you back, you got to think about, if you're looking to start a business, the easiest way to start a business is this 4 steps. What do I already know that somebody else is already buying? Do you have a skill, a talent, something else that you learned in your corporate job or in your life that somebody's already buying? That's the easiest way to start to sell something on the side so that you don't have to leave your job. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's like, okay, where would I go find more people to buy that thing? Because you have to prove viability at first in a business. You got to get proof of concept, your first 100,000. Anything else I talk about in the book, you can't do anything until you have your first 100,000. Then it's growing and pouring gasoline on it. So first, it's understanding, do I have a belief that is hardwired in my subconscious that's actually preventing me from doing this? Some fear. And once I identify that and I drop it and I walk away from it, what do I do next? And it's going to be different for everyone, whether you're just starting or you're wanting to grow.
So income stream diversity is a bit of a love language for you in what I've researched about you. So what are some ways maybe that are overlooked that people can start to build multiple streams of income?
That's a good question. So one thing I want to create, because most people hear multiple streams of income, and there's all these things on social media that's like, the most successful people have 7, have 8, have 10, all these things. They're all lies. We did the research for my first book, Wealth Habits. The Forbes richest 400 have 4. And most of them are all interconnected, but 75% of the most successful people in the Forbes 400 and in the world all became that way through a business or through their family's business. It wasn't some real estate hack. It wasn't all of these other things. Like, it was from building a business. From there, then yes, it's from financial services and real estate and all of these other things. So the very first thing is to understand is we can do more with less. because we only have so much focus in a day. So when people start to do real estate and IP and this business and that business, you are fractionated. Unless you have a really big, sustainable, scalable business that you're pulling a ton of profit out of and you can deploy that capital into all of these other things, you need to be really strategic with how you're going to grow your money. Because do you need earned income? Like, do you need to make more money to pay for the grocery bills, inflation's out of control, and all these other things and put food on the table? That's earned income. If you need to increase your earned income, the best way to do that is through a business. Real estate, you need capital, to at least park in that investment, even if it's a minimal of 3%, 10%, 20%, you need some capital to start to create portfolio passive income, in this case, in real estate. And if you're starting to invest in stocks and bonds and other assets, you need capital to do that. So I always say, do you need more earned income? Because if the answer is yes, then we need to make more money. If we need to make more money, we want to start selling services, selling our skills. And even if you don't want to quit your job, actually some of the most successful entrepreneurs that we found, like Sarah Blakely, never quit her job when she started Spanx. She did that with her full-time job and was able to do that on the side. And I always say, people are like, oh, I don't want to work and go full-time and work on the weekends. Then you don't want it bad enough. If you're not willing to work in the 5 to 9 hours of the night when your kids are in sports or they go to bed or during a weekend, you don't want it bad enough. And that's okay. But I always say, know what you want and stop telling yourselves lies or being deceitful, because then you start to get stuck in this place of like incongruence. And then the inside of you feels like civil war. So decide, what do you want for your life? Do you really want a big bank account? Do you really want a bunch of assets? Or do you want to be able to go to Target on a Tuesday and be able to take your kids wherever you want? Whatever you want is fine, but know what it is so that you can design a life that fulfills it.
It's like reverse engineering.
Yes, reverse engineer everything. Otherwise, what happens is people start and they just go like a top and they spin all around and do all this activity. And then they wake up one day and they build a cage and they can't go to Target on a Tuesday. They can't go be with the kids when they want. They can't go on vacation. Decide what you want and realize that we are in, regardless of the economy, whatever's going on in the country's economy, nothing will matter more than what's going on in your own personal economy. So make sure that whatever it is that you want, that you architect that build, reverse engineer it, because you can create more than you can even imagine.
It sounds a little bit like maybe some of the businesses burn out because the people burn out.
Absolutely. It's the law of the lid. That's what I was saying even today. Sometimes like when the entrepreneur doesn't up-level their leadership and their talent and their skills, they become the glass ceiling on that business. But also if they're so fractionated and distracted and shiny object syndrome everywhere, well, where's the energy to put into the business to really grow it and give it the stability that it needs? So you have to protect yourself as the entrepreneur, your health, your focus, and that really starts with you knowing what you want. Because until you have that vision, you can't get other people around it to help you build it.
You said something before, your personal economy. And I was like, oh, that is so interesting. Tell me about that. What do you define as your personal economy?
Your personal economy is how much money you've coming in, how much money you got going out. Simple as that. I like to keep everything simple. And if you want to increase your personal economy, you make more, you spend less. You bridge the gap, and that spread is what you can start to invest. You want to make sure that you're at least able to start investing 20% of your earned income. So whether you have $100,000 from a job or $100,000 in net profit from your business, you want to start to think, how do I take $20,000? And some people might be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But if you can't do 10, 15, even 5, you're actually overspending. It's the litmus test that if I said to you, the way that you know that you're overspending is if you're not investing at least 10 to 15% of your annual income in stocks, in retirement, in a 401k. All right, I know, don't worry, it's not just you. You are overspending. So what happens is most people get a little bit more money, and the second they get more money, they elevate their lifestyle. I did not, the shoes that I wear, the cars that I drive, the houses that I have, still to this day, I don't show any of those things. People may see them if they see me, but I do not flash that because to me, that's not real wealth. Real wealth is when you're able to control your time. When you're able to choose that you want to come to this event to pour into people, that it doesn't matter what happens on the other side of it. It depends if you want to go to Target on a Tuesday or get your hair done in the middle of the day or go to the gym at 2 because that's when you really light up. That's real wealth. Like when you have time freedom. And so often people won't do what's needed in the short term in order for them to ever get that in the long term. So they're always on this hamster wheel of working to pay bills. The only way you're ever going to get ahead is to just earn as much as you can, but spend the least that you can. Downgrade your lifestyle so that you can increase your investing. That's when your money will make more money and that you won't always have to trade time for it.
It sounds like that's true of your personal economy and your business.
100%. They're interlinked. And that's why, unfortunately, the number one failure in businesses is money. That's why they fail. The 91%, 99.7% of them were all money problems because we haven't taken control of our own personal money. And then we start to play with business money and we think, oh, we've got more money, all this revenue, and people spend more than they make. And they perpetuate those same habits because behavior, money's a habit. They create those same habits in their business and then they're never able to get ahead. So I always go, what's the one thing that will give you everything? It's understanding money, how it will work, how to grow revenue in your business, how to pull profit out, and then how to create additional cash flowing assets for your personal economy so you can you can increase your overall net worth.
And then I have to think about this too. If you're bad with your money and you're a leader running a business, then your leaders become bad at managing money and the people managing those projects become bad at staying on budget for projects. It just kind of bleeds into where's all this money going?
Speed of the leader, speed of the team. My team will always hear me saying, this isn't profitable. I don't know. We got to watch. Like literally we talk about it all the time because it's like, okay, this revenue vertical isn't working. We're going to give it 6 weeks. We're going to give it 2 weeks, whatever it may be. And we're going to reassess. Like they know that. So even though I may not be teaching them, hey, you need to do this, they're catching it by association. They always say that, especially kids will catch more in their environment than their parents ever teach them. So they will catch the stressful conversations about money that mom and dad have, right? They won't catch what you're teaching them, right? So it's the same way in teams. They also are going to catch your stress, which is why you always have to kind of watch when you're really overwhelmed and not passing that off to your team.
Right.
So making sure that when you're making smart money decisions and you talk about those things, your team is going to hear that and they're going to start to think about that in their own lives and potentially, hopefully, make better decisions as well.
Yeah, I think there's a statistic where it's like people who sit by high performers are like 15% more likely.
Yes, I heard something about that recently. Yeah.
Yeah, be more productive. I think that's
just by being in the same proximity.
Yes.
Like not even being friends with them. Like it just speaks to energy. Well, when I was signing books today, one of the guests came up and I said, you were one of my point people. And she was like, what? And when I speak, I always find 3 or 4 people, because you can't see the whole way back, of like, just good energy. And when I look to that side of the stage, I'll focus on that one person. And she was one, like I could feel her energy. And we were, how many feet was that? She was away and I didn't even know her and I could barely see her. Like energy is a real thing. Like it's not some woo. I'm not obviously woo, but it's a real thing that we can vibe from people. And so I think it's really important. It's not just who's in your immediate circle, but it's really like who's just you sharing life with that can really affect your beliefs, your habits, your actions, your decisions.
Such a good lesson. Speaking of lessons.
Yes.
What's a lesson that you've learned the hard way that you wish you knew earlier as you've built your portfolio? And it could be in business or even in your life.
Oh, it's such a basic one. And I listened to it for 25 years. And one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was this thing I knew, but it's interesting. Like this happens as you get to certain levels, but it's location, location, location. Whether it's a business, a real estate investment property, whatever it is, location is king. I always say in real estate investing, like you always want to make sure you buy the ugliest house on the street so you can increase its value and have some equity on the upside. But what's also important is you want to make sure that it's on a pretty street. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made was I bought a house that just happened to be a little too close to a parking lot. It wasn't like next to a parking lot. It just happened to be a little close. That thing sat on the market, the longest property I ever had sit, because I failed on the one rule I knew, which was location, location, location. That's one. The second, as it applies to business, is you have to hire the person and be willing to train the talent. I have hired some of the most talented people in my life, but it wasn't the best personality fit for the team. And you can have the most talented person, but if it's not the right fit culturally, and if you don't align in your values, it will be a disaster. I would rather find somebody that aligns in my values and I have a little more frustration that I have to train them than somebody that comes in trained and we don't align in our values. So know your values and make sure that you hire for values. Second, hire for talent.
I'm going to need some people to stop and hit rewind, or play that again, because I have seen people like that where they hire them because they're the experts of the system or a process, or they're the best sellers. And I'm like, but they are a cancer culture and you are going to lose these other 5 incredible people because they cannot tolerate this person's energy anymore.
And even if those people stay, I got to work with them, right? Like they're on my team. So even if you don't ruin the whole team, why would you in your own business not want to work like the people that you work with? Or at least be aligned with like those value-based. And if you've never done it, if someone listens, like, what even is that? Like take a minute. Brene Brown is one of the ones that does the phenomenal work on this, where you can actually print out and look at your values, and you can do this with your team. Like, what are your top 2 values? You know, making sure that that's in alignment with who you are, because otherwise, to me, that's the foundation. That's like the location, right? Location of a business, location of a real estate property. You want to make sure that you are aligning yourself with people that fit your culture and fit the values that you are. Otherwise, every time it's like, oh yeah, that was a really good project, but man, I hated talking to that person on the phone. I mean, I've had hundreds of employees, so of course I've done this wrong a lot. And it was through those mistakes that I realized you want to make sure the values fit first.
So we've obviously talked a ton in this episode about making money, which everybody wants to know, how can I make more money? But I actually love how invested you are in giving back. So what's been the most fulfilling project that you've been a part of?
Oh my gosh. Well, I started a nonprofit when I was 26. It's the worst business decision I ever made, but it was the best life decision I ever made.
Good word.
I, found at 23, most of my friends were just graduating college, and I had fancy cars and fancy shoes and made more money than I ever thought humanly possible for me to make. And from 23 to 26, I was just kind of like, is this it? Like, this is what this feels like. And anyone listening, maybe at some point in your life, you felt that, like where you've worked really hard for something, maybe materially, and then you get it. And it's like good for maybe 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 weeks. And it's like, is that it? And I think that you have to feel that a few times to realize that the accumulation of wealth is not actually what we're after. When we're really wanting to just make more money, most times we're trying to either feel a void that's inside of us, or we're trying to prove our worth to someone. Sometimes that's proving our worth to ourselves. But for me, when I started this nonprofit, it wasn't like some dream I had. I literally bought a building, one of many. I was like, what am I going to do with that building? I was driving by it one day, leaving my office 9:00 at night. It was dark out. I had my big fancy car, suit, wore suits back then too, big fancy briefcase, got in my car, and I looked at that building on the corner, and my goal was to buy the whole street. So I anchored buildings, and I wanted to buy all the buildings in the middle so I wanted to put like Candyland, Yeah, I was 26. And I looked at that building and I thought, what am I going to do with that building? Like, it's been sitting there a year now. I bought it when I was 25. And it was like a voice just like us talking, leaned up from the back seat of my Escalade and said, put your animal shelter there.
I literally just got goosebumps. No joke.
And I remember to the point where I looked over my right shoulder, but yet it would just like hit. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I literally drove home. I was dating a guy who was at my house, and I was like, you know that building I just bought? I'm putting an animal shelter in there. And he's like, what? He's like, what do you know about an animal shelter or a nonprofit? I'm like, I don't know, but I started a business at 19 and I did all of this and I overcame abuse and I climbed out of poverty on my own. Like, I think I can start a nonprofit. And if you can just take that belief into every single thing you do, you will just be shocked at what you can accomplish in life. Because if I would have second guessed myself into not doing that, or talking myself into that I couldn't have done that, or who am I? Like, what do you know? You're not a lawyer or a veterinarian. Then we wouldn't have saved tens of thousands of animals from abuse and have programs for at-risk youth, kids who are in the foster system, kids that were sexually and physically abused, to be able to bring them into the sanctuary and tell them stories of hope and healing. If I would have second-guessed that voice. And so often, I know so many people listening right now, they're getting a gut check. I've heard that voice, or I'm hearing that voice, but they're not doing something with it. I want to encourage you, if that's you, don't ask another question. Don't try to figure out the 25 steps how. Just start. I started that nonprofit. It was like God opened doors everywhere. We got it open. We started saving animals. All of my real estate contacts and business contacts, I picked up the phone. I was like, hey, Joe, remember you helped me with this, this, and this? Oh, yeah. Remember I gave you this job? Yeah. I need you to come pour concrete for free at a nonprofit. Sure. When can I do it? And people just came out and helped. And we've been able to see, some of the absolute best in humanity through that nonprofit and that work. And it's still there. 13 employees, hundreds of animals in our care every single day.
Well, thank you for the work you do and for sharing that story. That's so incredible. Has the work that you've been doing with that nonprofit changed how you show up in your profitable businesses?
Oh yeah. It's changed me. Like, that's probably the biggest thing. Like, has it changed how I show up in the profitable business? If anything, it just makes me want the profit more because I know what I can do with it, right? Like now at this stage in my life, it's not necessarily about, oh, we need the profit for this next thing. It's more about, I want it because I know who I can bless with it and how I can help with it, right? And we don't want to just do activities to do activities that take money. We want to do activities that create more money so that we can give more money. Right. And so for me, it's like building a rich life is not what we can take out of it. It's what we can give into it. And I think until you master that, you will always be on this perpetual hamster wheel of more, seeking validation, seeking that, filling that void. But it's really about what can we give? And when you focus on that and you can tune out the rest of what society tells you, man, life gets so rich. And to me, that's what I believe true wealth is.
I think that's such a good word to end on and let people kind of sit with that for a minute. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. You were so great. Thank you.
We enjoyed having you.
Yes.